Well, I'm curious, since we're kind of on that line, and one of the things that we talked about in the God as a Sock that I talked about in the God as a Sock study was the distinction, between the path of the wicked being destroyed versus the actual wicked being destroyed. And our inclination tends to be that we want the bad guys to just be extinguished. It's cathartic for the good guys to win, the bad guys to go away. Um, and I've even heard, like, if you know the was it the 23rd Psalm, you've set a table before my enemies. To me, what I always took that was an act of reconciliation, that God was bringing me and the people I most hate together over a meal in an act of peacemaking and reconciliation. But I actually heard a pastor once say, yeah, it just says that the table's set before my enemies, that it's not for them. They have to sit on the ground and watch me eat while I get to feast and rejoice in the Lord, and they get to suffer. There are there are prophets and kings in the Old Testament who complain about, in the Old Testament days, that the righteous and wicked get treated the same by God. So what's the point of trying so hard to be good? And then, we can even look in the New Testament at things like the stories of the laborers, and the fact that the one that works all day gets paid the same as the one that works for an hour, and basically, they're complaining. They're saying, hey, this isn't fair. And really the point is, it's not about fair. You don't need to worry about fair. God's love in your terms of fairness is not going to make sense. And that's a hard one. Yeah, I agree, Deanna. I mean, it's hard, but at the same time, it's all by comparison, isn't it? It's always looking at someone else and saying, well, at least I'm better than that person. Definitely agree that folks like Gandhi and King have sort of evoked that spirit of nonviolence into modern Western culture. I wonder, though, if Buddhism, though, hasn't kind of had a handle on this for a lot longer than we have. In case anybody's not familiar with the Bonhoeffer story, basically, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a theologian who was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler during the Second World War. And he was also a pacifist, and so he acknowledged that he was faced with a conundrum, because he felt like dealing with violence by using violence was wrong, but he I think what Walter Wink would say was he lacked the creative imagination to see any other possible outcome in that situation other than trying to kill Hitler. And so basically, and correct me, Dave, if you see his conclusion as different, but he said, no, I'm not going to try to justify this plot to assassinate him. It is wrong, but I don't see another way, and I will deal with the consequences, come my judgment from God. There's a difference between learning something from suffering, or learning something from pain, or learning something from death, and welcoming it in some sort of morbid, self-destructive kind of way. It's the difference between the idea that God brought the floods on Louisiana for a reason versus God can help make something beautiful even out of the destruction of New Orleans, And a lot of times Christians don't make that important distinction between those two, I think. And what we tend to do with it is that we make it back to this sort of retributive justice God that requires punishment for sin. And the sin, and the punishment is the suffering and death of Jesus because he substituted himself for us, rather than this possibly, which is such a very pagan notion, and a pre-Christian notion of sacrifice, and what sacrifice was meant to be, even in the Jewish culture, which was to take all your bad mojo and put it on this thing and then kill it, and that ameliorates or exonerates you of that sin. But to really reframe the crucifixion and the resurrection as a as a place. And it wasn't even that Jesus wasn't ever afraid. I mean, look at him in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? I mean, the guy sweated blood, you know. He was terrified. But before he came to the cross, he came to terms with that fear. And he came to terms with death and with suffering in a way that it no longer had power over him. I mean, and the ultimate evidence of that to me is even in the forgive them for they know not what they do. The very fact that he was thinking and acting out of compassion at the moment of greatest suffering shows it had no power over him. And that is a gospel message to me.